Hi, everybody. Cal Griffin here. And thanks for listening. So, disclaimer, we do not recognize any religious, political, sexual identity, sexual preference. We are here only as people, as Jedi, and do not push political views, though there may be opinions of different subjects and topics. However, with that being said, uh, I'm glad, I hope everybody's having a good day, afternoon, good morning, and somewhere in between, and good night if you're a night owl. But also, too, I'd like to do a reach out to a friend of ours whose husband has has undergone a medical emergency, and that I hope that he has a solid recovery and his health remains and improves. So, with that being said, and anyway, today we're going to have something a little bit different here, folks. That one of my students, who is a information succubus, has been working on an assignment given to her of wanting to teach a class today. So I'm going to be standing aside and handing the floor over to my student, Yuli Genzer.
That's not how it's pronounced.
But anyway, okay, let's not get into semantics here. Okay,
Okay.
please
What does succubus mean?
do it.
What does succubus mean?
Succubus means you pull in things.
So you called me a sponge?
Well, yeah, you're an information sponge.
Okay. That makes
You
sense.
love information.
Yes.
If you were a black hole, you would be that. You just pulling everything in.
I'm just kind of going, homework. Yes.
Yeah. See, you're a homework junkie. You're an info junkie. You're an info junkie. So yeah, she's this student of mine, which I've been working with for over a year now, has shown a great deal of promise. She's still got a ways to go, but she's a wealth of information. So, with that being said, I hand the mic and the time over to you.
Okay.
Have at it.
Okay. So today we're going to talk about different perspectives on truth. So there are different types of truth. There's relative truth about our perceptions and what we perceive. And then there's the actual truth of the situation. And there's one other type of truth that's called like a universal truth, which universal truths don't change despite time, location, or circumstance. So, they're not really dependent on belief. And so there are, and what I was discussing earlier with the relative and the actual truth, that's part of the two truths doctrine of Buddhism, that there is what we perceive, what we think is true, and then there's like the actual truth of the situation. And universal truths There are 3 universal truths in Buddhism, actually, as well. Anicca, which means impermanence, everything changes. Dukkha, which means all beings suffer in life. There's suffering, discomfort, dissatisfaction. And we create our own dukkha through ignorance of suffering and attachments to create it. And then anatta, which means no self, no ego, which goes into actually the perspective on personal truth and actual truth, actually, because it talks about like how we define ourselves, the truths about ourselves. So a quote that Dogen once said in Zen, which was like the founder of Zen in Japan, he said, to learn the self is to forget the self, to forget the self is to perceive the self in all things. We have a tendency to identify as what we do or an attribute, because but that can't be like a solid truth about ourselves, because that can change over time depending on what it is. So any questions on that?
I'm listening to what you have, and then from there, I think I'm gonna raise my questions if my brain works that way today. So,
Okay.
but anyway, no, keep going. But okay, oh yeah, keep going. I'm trying to extrapolate myself here today.
Well, when it comes to personal truths about ourselves, we there's no like fixed state of who we are. There's always like changes with that.
Mhm. Now,
So
okay, go ahead. Go ahead. Finish what you were saying.
so that can be down to like biology. Our cells change, they reproduce. We don't ever have a fixed state in our physical bodies. And
Mhm.
also the different aspects of what we think as ourselves can be like thoughts. Well, that changes with external factors. So it goes down to what actually is the truth about ourselves in a fixed state.
Okay, so I know that I'm going to try to not hit on something directly, but with the recent development and things, and is that in the actual truth with something, and a universal truth. What if someone's actual truth of themselves is influenced by an outside source
Then
that
is that
is,
actually themselves?
we'll say the that's where influence,
That's coming in through influence and change.
right? So if
So you have
someone,
the state of self, which is like the things that don't change. They're the truths about the self. And then you have the outside influence that is that can change our perceptions of the self,
okay, all right,
which may not, it may be more of beliefs based than actual truth.
okay, so would those beliefs be under opinion?
It would be under more of an opinion, but it wouldn't be necessarily an actual truth because it changes. It wouldn't be
So
a universal truth, and it wouldn't be necessarily what constantly makes that person who they are.
okay, so it would be fundamentally a truth and based in an actual truth of someone's idea of who they are.
You have
Is
the
that
concept of how someone perceives themselves, and then you have the concept of the actual what they actually are.
so? We're looking at one's perspective of a truth subjectively,
Yes.
other than what the actual truth is and what that influence to possibly change a person's mind of an opinion of themselves, to bring them to an actual truth, or an opinion based on a falsehood, which could be.
So what you're talking about here is like the outside perspective being an interpretive representation of selected stimuli. I'm seeing this thing, this attribute, and I'm contributing it to myself. It's not necessarily who I am. We define ourselves usually by attributes or what we do. That's what feeds our egos, kind of a thing.
Okay, all right, that's the
So
answer.
it's truth of the perception of what someone sees versus truth of the actual reality of the situation.
Right, that's the answer I was looking for.
Yeah.
And so to.
And even in that, emotions can also affect our perception in that. And feelings aren't actually factual, they're a response to what's happening.
Mm-hmm.
And in that, we'll often find people who feel the same way about something.
Mm-hmm.
And they have the ability to have a response to what we're saying on an emotional level.
Right. Right. Okay. So that's something that Buddhism does touch on, is that how our emotional state can affect our state of being and our and a reality, that it affects our perception.
Mm-hmm.
So in that, what influences may be there may feed on that emotion or that emotional state to influence.
And then you
And
can get a bunch of people that are basing their perception of reality on that emotional state. They'll agree with each other, and it won't actually show the bigger picture of what's actually going on in a situation, because when you agree on something, you're not necessarily agreeing on all the facts when you do that. So yeah.
yeah, you're basing a determination, a decision
So
on.
we're needing to have an understanding between like the emotions and the logic version of what's actually happening. And
Mhm.
one thing that you said one time was a question, and you asked me this: can emotions and logic be in motion at the same time?
I did, didn't I?
Yes, you did.
Wow.
Yeah, that was a year ago.
Oh, no doubt, no doubt. Wow.
We tend to mix emotions with how we view facts, sometimes only leading to what we think is important to be shared, not the actual facts into account.
And this is where on times that the teacher becomes the student.
Well, those were things that you were saying.
Good job. Good job. Good job. Thank you.
And emotions based on what we share, we tend to remember what we think is important rather than the entire event. It's going to be selective, but it doesn't mean that there isn't actual truth there.
Right. So, with that being said, and I have a feeling this might be like a 2 or a 3-part series in this, because what was being brought up here is a there's multiple levels.
Yes, I have
And
6 pages.
oh, oh my god, was there a forest left after you became the beaver to chop down the trees for progress
What?
for your were there trees left in the forest after you being
Oh,
a
it's all
busy
pictures.
little
Oh, it's all
beaver?
on my computer.
Well, I mean, because you were a busy little beaver here, and beavers, they'll take out trees just for their little hut. It's like, holy cow. Again, we have the information black hole of Yuli.
I,
So,
yeah.
so, but okay,
And
but
then you had something that someone else said. It was some sort of fact that was researched that people are incapable of making decisions without emotions.
yeah, yeah, because it causes an emotional response. And we like,
And we remember based on relevance. So understanding the actual facts to the situation, there's more involved with it.
now, can I throw a wrench in this?
Okay.
What is relevance and what is relevant to it?
What the person thinks is important.
Mm. So it would be a
So if
value.
the person has importance to it, or there's an emotion tied to it, they're more likely to remember it.
So it would be a value then.
If the person finds it to be a value, they're going to remember it more.
Yeah.
And so you're going to get the information that the person thinks is important, not all the little details of the situation, because it's impossible for that person to remember everything that happened. They're just going to tell you the select information that's like, this is what's important about the situation that I witnessed.
Yeah.
And that can be dependent on perspective, emotions, what the person actually thinks about the situation, their opinions.
Right. Right.
And so
Well,
you have that personal perspective, and then you have the actual what actually happened in the situation.
right. Right. Okay. So yeah, keep going. I'm loving this today. I'm loving this today. So yeah, keep going. Keep going.
Okay. Let's see. So our perception is confined to what we're focusing on, and our brains can process and what our brains can process at the time. We're
Hmm.
limited to our perception. So how do we actually perceive the actual reality?
I think that would be based on what is actually an occurrence, what is actually in motion, which
So
would
there was that example that was presented to me earlier about that accident with the multiple witnesses and the investigator, right?
okay. Right.
So you got all these people who have different perspectives of what happened, and then you have the facts that you learn from the physical evidence of the situation.
Mm-hmm.
But your job as an investigator is to ask the witnesses what actually happened in
Mm-hmm.
order to get to the truth of the situation.
Right. Right.
And so the question is, how do you actually do that?
Mm-hmm. Right.
Um, so my response to that was, as soon as people start conversating, they start agreeing on what happened. So you need to ask people individually what happened and make sure that they don't conversate very much after the accident between the time when you talk to them and
Okay.
the when the accident had occurred.
Right. So, Xenon, what's your thoughts on this?
I'm still formulating a thought.
Okay.
So you
Okay.
would take all the evidence of the scene and you would ask people what happened. You have the perspective of the passenger, the driver, all these people who were involved. They're going to give different information based off of what they're perceiving, what they think is important, and what they're actually willing to share.
Right. So, what if somebody didn't actually witness the full accounts, okay, of from start to finish, but yet their experience with one of the participants in the accident would lend or add to?
That would still be used as evidence because that person had witnessed some information or experience
Mm-hmm.
that was like a physical experience. It's not just hearsay. So it would be permissible in court.
So it would be an actual
It would
reality.
be an actual account of what
Right.
happened before the accident that would tell someone about the driver's ability.
Right. So it is an actual fact
Yes.
based on an
Experience.
experience, but
Yes.
by someone's character, someone's temperament, someone's what their actions that were displayed, which would lend to how this may be. Because if the person was operating the vehicle recklessly, then maybe this person has a habit of operating and having a risk-taking behavior behind the wheel, which would add to this situation that might have led up to based on what this person had done in the past, which would be what they are doing in continuation. So, okay.
So I'm gonna switch the topic up a little bit.
Okay.
We're gonna talk about knowledge versus belief in perception, in personal perception and actual truth.
Okay.
Okay. When you know something, you don't say you believe it. And when you believe something, it doesn't necessarily mean that you know it. Belief isn't knowledge because beliefs can't be proven as factual. They're personal truths, but it's something that someone wants to think is true. So it's a personal truth. It's not the actual truth for everybody.
Okay. So in this, so with actual truth, okay, how is that defined? Okay. Is that
It
what
is
is
the truth of the situation, or it's a universal truth.
so what we're looking
So
at?
beliefs are more like the perception of what's happening. It's incorporated in the opinion of what the person thinks about the actual truth, but it's not what the actual truth is necessarily.
Okay. Okay. So the actual truth would be what events are unfolding
Yes.
at
So
the
it
time.
would be something that wouldn't necessarily be up for debate on what someone believes about it. It would be, we have evidence here. This is the evidence. This is what we know about it. This is what we conclude from the evidence.
Okay.
And then you have the universal truths, which don't change depending on time, location, or circumstance.
Okay. So what universal truth would apply?
Well, I had some examples from Buddhism that I mentioned earlier, like impermanence, everything changes.
Mm-hmm.
There can be beliefs against that, but that doesn't mean that in the actual reality of what is, that there's something that we know that's outside of that. So everything that we know tends to be everything changes. Therefore, we can conclude that it's more of a universal truth. You got Dukkha, things suffer, being suffer, all that. You can see that with it can be observed. And the very fact that people are trying to escape some sort of suffering.
Right.
It's
So
proof of that. And then anatta, no self, no ego. It's more of we can't pin down a fix. Like there's only so much that we can actually pin down to a fixed state of self. There's always change with it. So it's
man,
like, and the ego wants to hold on to this idea of like, this is who I am by attributes, by what we do. It's not necessarily who we actually are.
so one's past could one's past could cause them to actually believe who they are in present based on what they've done in the past.
Yeah.
Okay.
It can be past experiences. It can be like beliefs about the self. It can be just different things, different groups we're trying to be a part of, different things like that. It's all that identity stuff, what we're trying to identify as in terms of attributes or what we do.
So if someone feels like they're a piece of garbage based on what they've done in the past, and that say maybe some of the circumstances weren't under their control, or they had no control over them.
Their ego is wanting to hold on to a fixed state of self. So it will decide to grab onto that attribute even if it's not a good thing.
Okay.
It'll try to hold on to it.
Okay. So
it's a part of like an attachment type thing.
Right. So that part of the ego, which is the part that protects itself.
Yeah.
Okay. So in a way, would that ego see this infringement upon it?
It would cause some sort of suffering to an extent, but the ego would still have an attachment to it because it wants to be defined. It wants to have an attribute. If it doesn't have that, it's like, oh no, I don't know who I am, and there's an identity crisis.
Right. But they base their identity on what they've done in the past, which would be, in a way, partially of a universal, but partially
It's not necessarily a universal truth about the self if they're identifying as a state of the past, because time changes.
Right.
So it's just something that the ego is trying to hold on to.
Right. So it's being self-protecting. It's still trying to maintain its own identity as that ego from a former experiences then.
And that can happen with anything. I mean, people say that, hey, yeah, I'm a bonsai hobbyist. That's my identity now. Or like this religion, I'm this religion now, and I identify as that. And it's like, that's the ego holding on to things.
Right. Okay. I'm enjoying this. This is definitely a different, it's, when one is always giving out the information, okay, but yet you're hearing something that is informative. It adds to food for thought, because I'm hearing many topics here in itself. In this presentation, I'm hearing so many topics like, oh boy, it's like, oh, there are things in here that could extend out into
that's why it's 6 pages.
Right. Let's dive down the wormhole.
I could have kept going with it.
Yeah, let's dive down the wormhole even further.
I do have one other topic.
The Tao.
What?
The Tao.
Well, I have heard some. On another note, there was a quote that I had from a Taoist perspective on There's okay. So there's this thought of like, I see a tree, right? The awareness,
Mhm.
I am seeing a tree. It
Right.
kind of, from a Taoist perspective, it seems like you are creating a separation between you and the tree. It's I and tree kind of a thing.
Right.
You have that I in there. You got that like separation from what you're perceiving in
Right.
there. And in a book I was reading, it described this concept of, if you're aware of yourself, the sense of I is the division between you and the tree, where in Taoist poetry, it wouldn't even use the I, it would just describe the tree to define the relationship between the self and the natural worlds.
Man, wouldn't one be kind of screwed if they were like identifying as a tree?
They're not identifying as a tree, they're describing the interdependence between themselves and the tree.
Ah,
I have a relationship with that tree. Like that tree's my friend. I'm hanging
okay.
out with that tree. So, the
It
joke.
loves me. It loves me, and it cuddles me. And it's got this big cubby hole that I
Well,
go to sleep in.
also, I kind of study the relationships between beliefs and the natural world. So, like the Taoist perspective and the tree, and the difference between that and how other spiritualities would define that or
Right.
explain that.
So,
So beliefs can change our attitudes and perspectives in spirituality, and also our interactions with the environment.
so in Jediism, okay, we rely heavily on the Force, right? We believe that there is a relationship between people and living things on the planet and in the universe.
That is talking about interdependence between all
hmm
things.
But in a
And
way, wouldn't that also be a universal truth?
yeah, because that's actually one of the Buddhist three universal truths, that everything is interdependent.
And that it is not changing, even though time has changed.
And it's very interesting to realize the impact that that thought can have on how someone interacts with what's around them.
Yeah. Yeah.
That perspective, it can change how people actually interact with the environment, with different situations, how they're holding themselves. The beliefs can affect one's actions towards the natural world, the impact that they're actually having on the world, because it takes someone out of the what would be called human centricism kind of a thing, where it's just about people. It's just
Yeah.
about, we're not even caring about what's around us kind of a thing. It's just people are important. We're gonna drive for the advancement of people. It kind of goes into egocentrism.
hmm
But when you get into more of the interdependence of all things, you get more into an understanding that there are the environments around us can be important. It's that perspective.
Because it nurtures the relationship.
It keeps from overindulgence of the ego, actually.
Moderation.
Moderation.
Yeah.
With understanding that you're having an impact on what's around you.
Right.
And it helps with making decisions with the natural world, but still there are still cases in that you can make egocentric decisions because you feel bad for something. You're putting your emotions in with it, and so you may not be making the best decisions in that because you're getting emotional about it, and you're not making necessarily the best decisions for the environment.
Right. So one has, as So one is
It's
become
because they want to feel good about it
right,
and not
right.
necessarily what's best for the natural worlds.
They want that desire or that want, that
They
action
want,
of
they want
the
the
emotion.
fuzzy feelings of being a good person, and they think that that's a part of that, but it's not actually helping the environment
Yeah. So
at all times.
let me kind of steal the mic from me for a moment here. That
Okay.
and yes, I'm still going to maintain that the floor is yours, but I want to make kind of a point here that the flow of the force, the living force, is what we're touching on here. Is that relationship of the nurturing? Okay, that yes, when one is in touch and does have that relationship with the force and the tree. It's a beautiful tree. I can only imagine what this tree looks like. So that maybe it's a bonsai tree, but
Ooh,
yeah, a little gnome with it. But
gnomes
and
don't go with bonsai. They're not allowed in the
we're okay. Just go with me here. Okay, go with me here. Go with me here. He's a tiny gnome. So anyway,
No,
so
not allowed. They're not allowed in the bonsai garden.
okay. All right, hold on. Okay, hold
When
on.
I was doing bonsai, that was a rule. No gnomes in the bonsai garden.
No gnomes.
I was very against that. My mom loved gnomes, and she just like, I'm putting them over here. I'm like, they're not going near the bonsai garden. You keep those gnomes away.
little cheeky bastards. So anyway, so with the force is that it thrives and we thrive from it. We have an interdependence, right? And
Yeah.
so if one is to step aside or away, and that detachment that you had mentioned earlier, wouldn't that become a actual truth once one has the realization of our interdependence and relationship?
In some cases, the understanding of the interdependence in all things in Zen and the alleviation of suffering
Hmm.
causes some sort of enlightenment.
Right, because we
And
become.
in Taoist practice, it seems from what I've read about it,
Hmm.
um, that understanding the interdependence of all things, understanding the Tao, all that
Hmm.
leads to some sort of enlightenment. And there's beliefs about what happens with that, whether that happens in some sort of, it affects something in the afterlife or something like that, depending on the period that it was believed.
Right. So the Tao is something that is into action, right? It's put in action, right?
It very, like, the practice of Taoism is very putting things into action.
Right.
It's a lot less book study. You got Confucianism, which was a lot more of sitting down and studying things all the time to
Hmm.
obtain some sort of state of better knowledge. You got Taoism, which was more of, well, we're going to sit and we're going to practice and then we're going to reach some sort of enlightenment eventually. And then you have Buddhism, which is more of like the balance between the two.
Hmm. So one would be enacting the Tao in nurturing and causing that interdependence and connection and relationship with the force, then wouldn't they?
It understanding the interdependence with the force is the same
Hmm.
concept of understanding the Tao.
Yeah, because you're in
It
act.
is the
You're
force itself was based off of similar concepts to
right,
Taoism.
right. So you are having it stay and having it connect, and you connect with it because of its your relationship with the tree, the bonsai tree, and
Yeah.
that, or the big oak tree.
And
You are,
that is a part of understanding perspective, the personal perspective, and the actual perspective of the reality. So that understanding of enlightenment, understanding that you are seeing reality as it really is, you are free from delusion,
mhm,
any kind of thing like that. Like there's a Buddhist vow that they'll say at the end of a meditation that's like,
mhm,
it talks about being relieved from suffering,
mhm.
uh basically perceiving reality as it is and being free from delusion and helping others to do the same.
So, which is where our emotions would create a delusion, then, wouldn't they?
It would play a
Yeah.
part in that.
Yeah. Okay. Great. I wanted to bring that up because I think that in the study and the practice and the growth in Jediism, that I think that fundamental is forgotten about. That we focus on everything else outside.
And then understanding the interdependence of all things,
Yeah.
and also understanding how to weigh out decisions with understanding our impact with the environment and things around us. There's
Hmm.
actually a technique I know that I
Hmm.
learned called a Nikan reflection,
Ooh.
which is you ask like 3 questions, but I have 4 here to kind of explain the second one. The first question is, what am I gaining? The
Right.
second set of questions is, what am I giving? What positive impact is happening of this? And then the
Right.
third one is, what harm am I causing?
Yes.
If you go through all those things, and you can ask those questions with pretty much anything. Like you could pick a shoe and
Right.
understand the interdependence with your shoe based off of those questions.
Boy, that must be a really lovely shoe. That must be like a shoe that just, it's like those little fuzzy rabbit slippers.
Well, it's like from the shoe, what am I gaining? What am I
Yeah.
gaining from the shoe being in my life? What am I giving to the shoe? What impact am I having on the shoe, and what harm am I causing it?
A shoe's job is to put on your feet. What
Yes,
harm are you? It's like if you want to go running
yes,
down the road.
but if you think about it, like the materials of the shoe have an impact on the environment depending on what it's made of. So you can understand what that's happening. You can understand the gratitude that you get from wearing the shoe. I am grateful for having these shoes because I don't get my feet hurt when I step on glass with them.
Right,
Something
right,
like
right,
that.
right.
It's a way of expressing gratitude. It's a way of understanding the interdependence of all things. It's a way to understand what wear and tear you're causing to your shoes.
Well,
Kind of thing.
it would be, oh, great shoe, forgive me and show me mercy that I
Oh,
have.
nothing like that. No, don't even do that. We're not idolizing the shoe town.
Oh, we're gonna make a monument over the shoe, over the great shoe,
But I mean, you
the
can do this
fuzzy
with
rabbit
a
shoe.
tree. You can do this with a tree. You can do it with a goldfish. You can understand the interdependence of all things.
Keep going. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. I didn't want it. I'm not trying to mock you, but I'm going. My brain is just kicking up, and just. But no, This is really informative today, but
Yeah.
it's just, and it is deep and it is intense. But however, to uh, keep going. This is
Well,
good.
that's about all I got. I'm on page
Oh,
6.
huh?
Yeah.
I feel like I got shortchanged here.
What?
Are you sure this is 6 pages?
It is 6 pages. I went through 6 pages.
That was a gnome's hype of 6 pages.
I went fast.
Jeez.
Yeah,
Whirlwind.
there's a lot of information.
I paid for an hour.
It was an hour, wasn't it? It was 57 minutes.
Ooh, already?
Yeah.
Wow. That means that every podcast we've had through this has been over an hour.
Yeah.
Because that was 15 minutes, is what it felt like. Here we go. Here's the actual versus
I
the.
think everybody just hyper focused and just
Oh, I
forgot
love
how
it.
time works.
I love it.
It
Yeah.
might have been that.
See,
Yeah.
we did jump down the rabbit hole with the leading succubus here. So,
That's a weird word. Just call it a sponge.
right.
Did I just call myself in it?
Right. So, Xenon, your question or comment you were putting together. What is it?
Give me a couple moments to try and figure out how to word it.
Hmm. Talk to the shoe.
Wow.
Consult to the shoe. Oh dear shoe, how might I gain?
Are we talking about praying to a shoe now?
Well, yes. We're like trying to see if she can gain footing here.
Oh yeah. If you need a foot, you pray to a shoe.
Yes. Let us turn to the shoe. Let us turn to the shoe.
Oh, the jokes.
That's why I love this. It's like we just one little thing. But anyway. So what have you got? What have you got? Inquiring minds want to know. No pressure. Come on.
Okay, so going back to the first example that you used with the whole car crash thing,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
would it be safe to say that regardless of how little a witness saw whatever,
Mm-hmm.
or regardless of if what they remember versus what actually happened, is it safe to say that all these small little pieces, regardless of if it's truth or not, is relevant for the overall storyline
It would give
and
it
thus
the
would just need to be
investigation, I would
placed
think.
together?
Excuse me for a minute, guys. We'll be right back.
I think it would do an impact on the investigation. Because wouldn't that they have to get all the information together to figure out what the actual truth is of the situation. So you have the information from the witnesses that you're getting, and those might not all be factual. But they're going to perceive something that happened in the situation, and so that might be some insight that they can use in the investigation. But they're also using facts of what actually occurred, what evidence they actually found during the situation too. How the cars hit each other, tire marks would indicate speed, depending, before the crash, if anyone used their brakes. Different things like that would have an impact on how the investigation would go. If that makes sense.
Okay, what did I miss?
Oh, I just answered your question.
All right. So,
I basically said that any information that could help the investigation would be deemed as important because it's going to have some bit of truth in it, depending, but it may not be the actual truth or the whole truth, or someone could be just putting a opinion in there with it.
Right.
But they would use the other information gathered to help sort through what actually happened.
Right. Right. So it would lend to the actuality.
Yes, it would give more of a bigger picture of what actually happened, and then what are people actually perceiving from what happened.
Okay. Right. There's a lot to be said about that example, which supports the actual versus
Personal perspective.
right. Because one could input in one's opinion about the car, okay, that that lent to the accident to happen, okay, the color of it, or that was maybe the car had been the color or the type of wheel that lended to it's like that car's known to be a bad car, where in that because of its the year.
I've
Well,
noticed something about the tendency of drivers depending on what they drive. Like,
yeah,
Tesla cars will drive super slow because they don't want to damage their cars because they're so expensive.
right. But yet, say you have someone who drives a Toyota, right? But yet they drive that Toyota like it's a Ferrari. Okay. Well, but yet then when somebody has a Ferrari or
It
Lamborghini,
is thought mostly that this person is going to drive this way because of the car that they have. So that could impact witness statements, depending on, and that doesn't mean necessarily that it was actually true.
but yet maybe that driver of the Toyota was actually the cause.
So that's personal perspective, opinions, personal experiences that are impacting how someone is actually perceiving the event. And then you're taking that and you're trying to take the evidence and actually form what actually happened in the accident, depending on the evidence presented and what you gathered from witnesses.
Because say that Toyota is driving recklessly, but yet that Ferrari, Lamborghini, that exotic car driver was the one that was actually obeying the traffic laws.
Yeah.
But yet based on because they drive a $200,000 car.
Or the thought of if a car stands out more, they're more likely to get pulled over for speeding.
But would that be because of the car's color, or would that be because of the person operating the car?
It's statistically more likely for certain color cars that stand out more to be pulled over for speeding than other color cars. So I guess bright red cars are more likely to get pulled over than any other color of car because they stand out more.
Yeah, it catches the eye.
Yeah. So like a few more people could be driving the same way in different cars that aren't that color and not get pulled over, but because the person is in a red car and they're not obeying traffic laws, they might be speeding, they might be doing something else.
Yeah, because
they're more likely to get pulled over than those other people.
Yep, I want to do something here that's kind of lends to this. Here is that I used to have an old 1989 Volkswagen Rabbit GTI 16 valve. Okay, a little two-door coupe, little two-door hatchback. Okay, that they came in a couple of different colors. All right, they came in a few different colors, but yet the way the car was designed lent itself to a performance enthusiast driving or a spirited driving. And so, and yes, by chance, by just so happened, the car was red. All right. But it was because of that. I like to drive fast. I like to push a car. I like to have a spirited driving experience. I love the experience from that. But however, so that would form an opinion that, oh, he drives like that because he drives a red car. When actuality and in truth, I am just a driver that likes to push my car. It's just that car happened to be.
It makes it more likely to draw attention.
Yeah. So I could be driving like a maniac in a red car.
You could be driving like a maniac in any car, and depending on which car you're driving could change the statistics of actually getting pulled over.
So really and truly, statistics are subjective to opinion. Right? Yeah.
Yeah.
So that.
So people's decisions on actually pulling over a car could be dependent on the car's color, what it looks like, things like that.
Right.
Not necessarily because it's driving worse than another car of a different color, of a different make or model.
Say you have a polka dot car. Same car, same model, but you have it polka dot.
Would the polka dots stand out more?
Well, yeah.
Then it would be more likely to get pulled over.
But what if the person
But
driving?
not as much as a red car.
Yeah, but if the person were calm and driving right, but yet still gets pulled over because they have a car that stands out that's polka dot. Okay, I know that's kind of
usually they'll notice that the speed is faster or something.
It might give the illusion of going faster, which so anyway, but
I think stripes would help with that more than polka dots.
Stripes, a zebra.
It'll blend in with the background and it'll go zoom.
Zoom, zoom. Yeah, right. So yeah, I know we in a way cut into your time of it, but this, I think in many ways, this what you had for subject today lends a very much of, in a way, people's opinions of what or how or who a Jedi is supposed to be.
I think I might have had notes on that too.
Okay. So
hold on. Let me scroll up. What page was that on? I think it was up here more. Oh, it was about ego and Jedi identity. And so defining yourself as a Jedi, and I put down that living by example rather than defining ourselves by how we are.
Could you elaborate on that a little bit?
Well, if you're living by example, it is more of what you're doing, but it's more of a description of what you're doing. It's not necessarily defining you by what you do.
Could you say that again?
Okay. So what actually is a Jedi then?
Okay.
you got to think what makes a person a Jedi, and there are different perspectives on it. There are different opinions. There's not one set idea that everyone agrees on. So you have to narrow down what makes a person a Jedi. And then it's not actually claiming identity in it. It's being a description of being an example as a Jedi rather than defining yourself by it.
So let's say you have somebody who is a former hardened criminal. Okay. And they are practicing this, and that they struggle with the change. Okay. With the change of thought, with the change of behavior, with the change of response. Okay.
But
And
isn't that a part of it?
yes,
But just because someone struggles with it doesn't mean that they're not making the changes.
right. And the changes could be, the struggling could be actually letting go of their former self.
It becomes part of the journey.
So just
It's
because,
more of what you do in that rather than the definition of this is what I'm defining myself as.
now we can have some that, and we all in a way define Jediism by who we are.
It is something that you do, so it would be more like Jediism is my practice. It's something that I do rather than just going, well, this is who I am. This is a fixed state of me. It doesn't define a fixed state of the self, really. It's about change.
So I want to touch on something here, and I'm not criticizing anybody when I say this. I want this out there, and I want this to be known, is that we have people that say, I am a, right? I am a Jedi, right? Okay. So though we do agree that in as a umbrella statement that I am a Jedi is defined by this state or this practice, these actions, by what we do, right?
Yeah.
Or this way of life of change.
But to say that I am a Jedi, that is giving the ego an identity.
Yes.
It is saying this is who I am, and it's what you do. You're defining yourself by something that you're doing. You're going through some sort of change.
It is the
it's going back to what I was talking about the ego trying to define itself by definitions and attributes. It wants some fixed state of self. So even just saying that I am a Jedi, you're still holding on, you're still giving your ego something to hold on to, unless it's just saying, oh yeah, this is just something that I do.
Yeah. So one could say
it can be fairly similar with Buddhism. You'll have Buddhists that say, hey, I'm a Buddhist, where other Buddhists are like, no, it's something that I practice, but I don't identify as a Buddhist because that goes against the no self concept. It identifies me as something, it's giving my ego something to hold on to. Therefore, I am not a Buddhist. I practice Buddhism.
So actually, so what would a Jedi actually be?
It is more of a state of being in change rather than a state in identity.
So the ebb and flow.
It is what you prove that you're doing by actions.
Right. So in this, the Taoist principle
So it is the practice of being a Jedi. It's incorporating that and incorporating everything that you're learning in order for self-improvement.
Right. So a Taoist practice would be a big portion.
I
of-
have for a while kind of seen the Jediism perspective as kind of being like a mix of Buddhism and Taoism.
Right.
I kind of see it as sort of a type of Zen
hmm
Buddhism, but
hmm
with more Taoist influence without it actually being like there are types of Zen that have like very minimal devotion to the Buddha whatsoever.
Yes. Yeah.
You
Yeah.
have that secular Zen humanism type stuff going on where they're like, no, we're just practicing it as a philosophy. And
hmm
that's still considered a type of Zen to some people, a type of Buddhism.
hmm
So you have that kind of thing going on, but it's not completely, it doesn't like always completely, it's not always completely like a secular thing.
Right. So I want to point something out here with this.
Because with that, like with the secular Zen, humanism, Buddhism type thing, they won't discuss anything metaphysical.
Interesting. So I want to discuss. I want to point something out here. Right. Okay. So if one is practicing Jediism, okay,
Right.
and say if one's mind would interpret that, go, oh, this person is a Jedi. Okay. Would essentially those be the same truths?
It would be depending on the person, defining people by their attributes,
Okay.
by what
But
they're doing, by their definitions. They're trying to define someone.
okay. But as a core, would that be, would the person's change of mind define the person that was like, hey, oh, they practice in that person's mind going, they are a Jedi.
People like to define things. They like to put things into little boxes.
So wouldn't that be a form of attachment?
It would be a form of attachment to wanting to define things and therefore is feeding the ego.
Very good. Very good.
And so some of this, like with the rule with like the identifying by politics or
Mhm.
religion or any other thing, it talks about like the holding on to stuff, the attachment to ego within conversation. Which yeah.
Right, because in conversation, taking this for an example here, that taking this into conversation, there are those that in a conversation to prove, and this lends to the ego. Okay, this lends to the ego.
They want to be
That
seen a certain way to feed their egos.
right, and that they would want to be that person that brings, even
So
though
pushing a perspective of the self into other people's minds, trying to get people to see them a certain way,
Mhm.
is feeding one's own ego if someone validates that.
because if that person is, say, awkward, but yet they come with a wealth of knowledge and then they spew and talk about all this information, right? And they think that or believe that this would make them more, like, more accepted or more inviting.
Are you
Wouldn't,
talking about the wanting to be a part of a group?
well, or have some kind of recognition because, say, this person is socially awkward, but yet the only thing they bring is just a wealth of information that their conversation is always about, or to one topic comes up going, oh, and they just go on about this and try to keep the conversation directed in that towards that topic.
Yeah.
So that person's ego
Is involved in that.
would be
They're
yeah,
trying to protect themselves.
yeah, they're trying to project themselves as a certain way of like, I am a highly knowledgeable person.
It is them trying to protect their ego. Their ego
Mhm.
is like, hey, I want to be accepted and I want to have this certain perspective of myself being put out there. I want to be seen a certain way and I want that to be validated.
Yeah, yeah. So, but
And so to validate that would be to feed that sense of wanting to have a very solid and just like the sense of identity that this person is this thing that this ego is trying to hold on to.
mhm. But yet after that, they never get invited back or are distanced from. So this would end up invariably wounding that ego.
Or people will start talking about like things that they've done, what they've earned, things like that, to kind of have people see them in a better light. And in that sense, they're trying to get validated in some way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So in essence and in reality, the person is just
In
playing out,
reality, they're boasting about what they've done
and that would mean
and
that the
trying
person,
to feed their ego.
right? So that would mean the person has less to offer, and that they are insecure
It does show
because,
that they're insecure. They're trying to protect themselves by putting information out there to make themselves look better because they don't think that people have a very good perception of who they actually are. And
yeah,
so they're trying to change people's opinions of themselves, and they can't control that. People can't control the perspectives that other people have on them. And
mm-hmm,
for some people, that is extremely bothering because they're like, I don't know how I'm being perceived, and I'm trying to protect myself. And
you
that is
know,
the ego talking.
right. And, is that, so in a way, one that would be secure would say, I just don't give a F, right? That
Something like that.
what you think,
They would be secure in they are who they are, and they don't need an outside perspective to validate, yeah, I'm this person, or see them in a better light.
mhm. And that if a person becomes offended because they in turn aren't recognized
Yeah, ego
by,
hurt.
yeah, right. So, and if that person called themselves a Jedi and they have not learned from this lesson, then would that make them any less of a Jedi?
It means that they have something to work on.
Yeah, I would say so. I would say so.
I mean, to discredit someone just based on the fact that they're trying to feed their ego on being a Jedi. I
Hmm.
mean, they have a lot to learn, but it
Yeah.
doesn't mean that they aren't at least attempting the practice.
Hmm. And that if someone were to take note and to add credence to this and take it to heart, then the person who was the windbag, if they learned from it and gained more,
I think
right.
in this, more confidence in the self.
Hmm.
Um, If you have more confidence in yourself, you're not going to want to push a perspective onto other people. You're not going to want to seek out different identities to be perceived better than
Mhm.
you usually are. You're satisfied with who you are, so you're not needing to feed your ego all the time.
So, in what you were bringing up as the topic today, where would this?
It goes into the idea of personal perspective versus actual truth. So you have two different perspectives here. You got the perspective of the person who wants to be perceived a certain way, and then you have the perspective of someone else, and then you have the actual truth of the situation. So you got two different personal perspectives there, and then you have the actual truth of what actually is. And then you
Right.
have the ego that's playing a part. You got emotions that's playing a part. You have all this stuff that has been talked about in this lesson that's playing a part in that situation.
Yeah. So this would go into the detachment from the ego,
Yeah.
which would
I
have
guess
to.
it's sort of what this lesson is about, but it's also
Yeah.
about perspective and truth.
Yeah, if we wanted to, if we wanted to bring it to, like, actually put it into a specific topic, it would be the detachment from the ego in this.
Yeah.
And that it would cause one to realize, or at least lead one in the direction of, I give my ego, or at least one part of my ego, too much credence, too
It
much
is
credit.
talking about detachment. It's talking about interdependence. It's talking about how we're affecting each other. It's
Mhm.
talking about the actual reality. It's talking about personal perspective. It's taking all of that and putting it into one lesson.
Yeah, yeah. So
It all kind of comes together. It just takes a while.
yes, yes. And this is where the growth, the honest growth of truth and actual truth and reality.
So the concept of interdependence, and I'll repeat this quote that I had here from Dogen, which was, hold up. Where did I put it? That is a good question. Oh, to learn the self is to forget the self. So it's talking about the ego there. And then the second part of it is to forget the self is to perceive the self in all things. That's talking about interdependence.
Okay.
So it's talking
So
about dropping away from the ego, not feeding it, and then seeing everything as interdependent.
now,
And in that, it's also talking about enlightenment.
okay. So in that, how would one look at there is no self in detaching from the ego?
It's not about no self, it's about not giving the ego something to grasp, not giving it attachment or identity, or like this thing that I have to be this. This is what defines me. I'm defined by what I do, I'm defined by these attributes. We're not actually defining ourselves by all those things, we're just being. And that, in a state, kind of defines the state of enlightenment. You're just being, you're not suffering, you're doing, you're just there.
Right. So this would be a part of one's true character, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
I guess, to put it in plain terms, that this would be one of those defining attributes of one's character.
And part of like the dropping of the ego can also be with suffering. We're not defining ourselves by the suffering that we're going through. We're not attaching to this concept of the suffering in our lives. We're not creating our own suffering by whatever mental state we're in. We're not holding on to that. We're actually
Right.
just seeing it as like pain instead of actual suffering. And so that goes into a part of this.
Mm-hmm.
where we're not letting our ego attach to things. And therefore, we are achieving enlightenment and we're seeing the interdependence of all things.
All right. So when one's character is realized and the attributes, the assets that character has,
It goes
then
into, what would you call it?
I don't know,
CC type stuff.
the persistence
It
of
in order to do that,
Mhm.
it goes into having to go through adversity,
Yeah,
having to
because
learn from it. And in that, you get to where you're dropping things from your ego and your
it goes into an
doing
alchemy.
all
Yeah,
things.
it goes into an alchemy. You're
Yeah,
deconstructing. You're deconstructing.
it's a part of it.
Yeah, and that in that when we're deconstructing and stripping away that part of our ego or those things from our ego, we are in many ways reconstructing and redefining ourselves. And that is a Taoist principle. That is a Taoist practice.
Well, we're seeing ourselves as the observer. We're just observing where that's the fixed state of self. That's the only thing that really sticks
Yeah.
as a state of self. It's like I just be. I be.
Right.
To be or not to be exist.
So that would mean that in that practice and in that frame of mind, that would be there is no self.
It is the understanding of interdependence. You don't see yourself as this separate thing from the rest of reality. You're a part of something bigger. You're not causing your ego to attach to things, to define yourself to this fixed thing, putting yourself in a box.
Right.
You're not sticking yourself in a box and separating yourself from everything else.
You know, there's something that a friend of mine told me that, and this can go to any of us, and this can apply to any of us, that this person told me, and I think I've used it, I've said it before, is that when a master or the master is ready, the student will appear. Okay. And in this, all right, that when one's character shows them, they need to strip things away from their ego. And when that master, mentor, teacher,
it's a part of emptying your cup.
yeah. So when that master can empty their cup, even though they may have a wealth of information, okay, if they can still step away from that ego, they are still no less of a master.
I think that's actually a Zen story. There was a student that went up to a Zen master and asked to be taught, but the student wasn't learning anything, and because they weren't open to the information. And so they were asking, how can I obtain enlightenment or all that? And then the Zen master was like, empty your cup. You can't keep filling a cup if it's already full. It's just gonna overflow.
So the master would actually have to empty themselves or their cup also in order to learn.
It would be stepping aside from this thought of I know everything I need to know. I don't need to learn it from someone else. It's humbling themselves, stepping aside from the ego that's like, hey, yeah, no, I got this, and becoming the student again.
So they would actually be learning how to work with the student so the student can learn.
I
Because
think
the
in
student is because
also
the student would be teaching the master, this is how I can gain more information, not to try to control and take over being the master,
no.
but yet the student would be saying, this is where I can flourish best. Please nourish me. And and if the master is present as a student would take note. Because one of the things that I've done with you, okay, and I'm going to reveal a little trade secret here, is that in order for you to have stepped out from where you were, one thing that I noticed is your desire. And for lack of a better word, fiending for information.
Well, I kind of gave you that.
Well, yeah, you did, but yet using that caused you to grow and change from your former.
I
Stepping
I knew what it would take, what information I would have to give in order to get that done.
right, but
What
yet
I would be signing up for.
right, but yet, like we were just talking about, that I had to become a student in order to help you to gain. And I think in a way that many masters forget this. And this is where, as in that dynamic, being a master means you can teach me nothing.
I think that's losing sight of the whole point of Jediism.
Yeah.
I mean, ignorance yet knowledge. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it's understanding that there's always something that we're going to be ignorant about, and there's always something that we can learn for self-betterment.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes our egos can get in the way of that.
Right, because a master, and I have to be aware of this, is that it would be easy for me to go, oh, I'm a master, so therefore I am never to be questioned, right? That I am
That
absolute.
that is feeding the fixed state of self that the ego is wanting.
Mm-hmm. So that would mean that I am not wanting to teach.
Which is being fed by the ego that's trying to protect its state of self.
Mm-hmm.
So you're not actually learning anything. You're just kind of stuck being where you are because you're feeding your ego.
Right. There's something that I was the lotus. Something about the lotus pertains to this.
No mud, no lotus.
I think so.
Okay. So that is a story that says you can't really obtain freedom from suffering if you don't sit in the mud a little bit. Like once the mud will settle at the bottom, but there's going to be some adversity that you're going to have to go to get the lotus to blossom.
Mm-hmm. Right. So in order to sit in the mud, what does that say? What does that teach?
Adversity.
Yeah.
It shows it's basically stoicism. It's sisu.
Mm-hmm. So this has gone from like a presentation
About truth and to ego to no self to I think at this point I'm basically teaching certain aspects of Buddhism.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Definitely. And I'm not opposed to it whatsoever, because all in Jedi, we are not just a fixed. We're not just a fixed station. It's not just we are not fixed in one facet, though there are aspects, but that I do lean towards, and I am biased with it. But on the other side of it, yet there are
Well,
facets.
Judaism was very much influenced by Buddhism. It shares a lot of concepts, and
Mhm. Right. So we would.
I mean, me myself, I would classify it as a type of Buddhism with a mix of Taoism.
Mhm.
And I mean, Zen already does that, but it has more of an influence from Taoism than I think Zen.
Right. I'm okay, let's see. Here we are. I'm looking something up, and that, I haven't said a lot. I've touched on it in portions that uh that in Awen, in a way, yes, there is a uh but yes, I go with in more of gray leanings, and in our conversation about ignorance and knowledge, right? I was thinking, okay, there's something in the gray code here that um that I think lends to that if one is still staying with the ego, okay, and sticking to the ego that leads them, okay, there is no good without evil, okay, but evil must not be allowed to flourish, okay. We can let the ego, that ego of ourselves, lead us, the protective ego, right?
Yeah, and it doesn't mean that we're making the best decisions with it.
Right. So, and this is where, and I'm going to touch on this a bit, and this apparently is going to be a longer podcast today, which I'm good with, because what you brought so much to go from here, and is allowing different avenues here in this. So,
I thought it would be an interesting topic.
oh no, it's been beautiful. I have thoroughly enjoyed this. That with it, that in a way, people have seen, and those that give gray, and there are those that deny and say it's more of a old school Jediism belief. Well, if that be the case, then one who is a old school type of Jedi, they would take the force as a whole and themselves as a whole, and using their light and their darker selves as needed, when needed, and not fear either. But however, when one is claiming and excusing their actions by being a great Jedi.
I
You're,
think
you're letting the ego
in
take
some
part.
cases that's considered blasphemy
I would think so.
because you're using this identity as
Mhm.
justification for ill action.
Right. Yeah. And that, and when one is practicing and is able to, they will let themselves have that part of themselves be present, but not feed, and let them justify themselves and work in a blasphemous way. Because, and let's face it, the community, because of certain individuals, have given it less less of a place, and the acceptance of and there only be this or that. Okay. But in a way, if we only go with one direction, that in itself is only feeding that one ego. You're only acknowledging that one part of the ego that must protect, that must not be changed. And in order, as in the grade code says, there is no good, there is no evil, but evil must not be allowed to flourish.
For someone who denies the parts of themselves that they don't like, they are feeding the ego because they are wanting to perceive themselves in a certain way. They're trying to identify with the better parts of themselves, and they're not actually seeing the full picture of the actuality and understanding themselves.
Right.
As
So to step away from that would mean they would actually realize the importance.
it's understanding that part of the self, learning to manage it and learning when to use it,
Right.
which in a lot of cases Buddhism teaches that.
Right. So that even though we have this side of us, then even if one were to use that darker, deeper side of us in the betterment, would
You would
still be
weigh out the options with that. What is
right.
actually the right choice?
Yeah.
There are many religions that will point out, hey, this is a set of steps to keep you from falling to that darker side.
Right. And that would still be staying away from that ego part of us.
Yeah, and a lot of different religions originally taught something close to that, the alleviation of suffering and also the getting away from that ego part of self.
Yeah, because in a way, in many facets, that with the gray part of it is one has completely stepped away from their ego. The ego plays no part, because in the in the code it also talks about balance. Okay, that that is finding that center, finding that place, that zen.
It is losing your sense of identity with
Because there is
what you define yourself with, attributes and
be-
what you do.
right, because there is no self,
No self.
there is only action.
There is only action and being.
Hmm.
You just be.
Right. And so in that, you are not egotistical.
No, you're not egocentric. You're not putting your ego before yourself. You are actually seeing more of the reality of what is actually going on with that.
Right.
You
Right.
are being freed from delusions. You're finding enlightenment in that when you incorporate all those concepts.
Because in that you're looking at the reality. You're looking at the actual of what must be done in order to resolve.
And you're weighing out your options
You're
with,
being
and with that, we could go back to the Nikan reflection. You're weighing out your options of what'll actually affect, what you're giving, what you're gaining, and what harm you're causing.
yeah. So
And you got to be very realistic in what the actual is in that to actually weigh out a good decision with it.
right, and logic.
Not necessarily based on emotions, because emotions can get in the way of the actual of what's going on when you're weighing that out.
And the ego plays a very big role, in a portion of the ego plays a very big role on emotion.
It is that wanting that you're wanting to stick in with what you're weighing out, and not necessarily the best action to do with it.
So detachment.
It is a part of detachment, which wasn't that last class? Wasn't that covered in the last class?
Yeah. And also with the detachment of the ego in this.
Yeah. See, what we're talking about here is enlightenment, but
Right.
we're also covering so many other different topics with it.
Right. So that's what I'm saying. We've got so much to talk about here that so this has gone long. And I tell you what, next week we'll pick up from here and we'll continue to go further.
Well, I don't know if I have any more notes on it right now.
Well,
That.
we'll refer back to the archives on this and bring it from there.
Okay.
All right. So I'd like to thank everybody for being here, taking part, those that will listen. Xenon, for your question today, though you seem to be the quiet, supportive.
It's just Xenon giving the question of the day.
Right. No, that's cool. That's cool. So anyway, thank you, everybody. And there is something I'd like to, before we disconnect here, is something I like to do is pose a challenge, a question, maybe a perspective, an opinion, maybe, is that in with how things have changed and dynamically, and how how society is being affected these days. Now, I would ask each one of you to look at how much of your ego has determined your reality and affected your choices and decisions, and that who has been negatively affected by that. And if the beliefs you have truly are actual, or have you been delusional based by your ego? And then from there, I think you will find the reality and truth of where you may have been misled. I know that's very cryptic, However, if one chooses, one will look. But either way, I bid all a good day, a good night, a good morning, and good evening. Cal Griffin out, and the presenter of Yuli and Allen Jedi. Thank you very much. All have a good day. And may the Force guide you. Thank you.